Maryanne Wolf è un'amica dell'Università Cattolica del Sacro Cuore, è una delle autrici di punta del catalogo di Vita e Pensiero, la casa editrice della Cattolica, e i lettori italiani, grazie a Vita e Pensiero, l'hanno conosciuta principalmente e inizialmente conosciuta, apprezzata, ammirata come saggista. È un studioso di neuroscienze con una formazione letteraria, ha scritto 2 libri che hanno avuto vastissima circolazione in Italia e non solo, sui meccanismi della lettura, su come il nostro cervello impara o rischia di disimparare in certi casi a leggere, Proust e il Calamaro prima e poi Lettore torna a casa, che è un saggio incentrato proprio sulle dinamiche della lettura digitale, nel contrasto tra lettura tradizionale e lettura digitale, contrasto forse chissà alleanza. Bene, adesso Maryanne Wolf è di nuovo in Italia, di nuovo all'Università Cattolica, portata dal suo nuovo libro, che non è un saggio, ma sono 3 novelle, dal titolo abbastanza sorprendente, Maria Magdalena e Gesù, storie di consolazione. L'editore è sempre Vita e Pensiero, la traduzione è di Melvina Parsi. Siamo qui appunto per parlarne con l'autrice. Maryanne, thank you very much for your being here. And the free story of consolation with the main character, the same main character, Jesus and Mary Magdalene. The strange fact is that we have 3 stories. In each one, Maria Magdalene tells her own story, but every time it is different. Why?
We don't know who Maria Magdalene was. Yet, what we know is tantalizing about a woman of absolute courage. There is only one person who's named at each of the most important events of Christ's life, and it's Maria Magdalene. Why? Why? Who is this woman? Who might she have been? And in a time in my life when COVID had just begun, there was a period of isolation that I think many of us have experienced. But for me, it was a time of great despondency. What is happening in the world? And the spiritual life was what was for me a place that I could be in my mind and in my heart and in my soul with what I considered or conceptualized Christ. And then I started thinking, what would it have been to have been a true friend? To have known him as a companion. And because I'm a woman, the only one that I could think about in those terms was Maria Magdalene. And then I thought, who is she? Who could she have been? And of course, the history of art is all wrong. Because since 580, when Pope Gregory made the fantastic mistake to confuse Mary of Bethany with her anointing of Christ in terms of the crucifixion with unguents, oils that prostitutes use. When he made that mistake, Maria Magdalene became in the imagination of the artist and of novelist the woman
sinner
who was the penitent prostitute, the sinner, the person who had made such a crime, and yet Christ gave her a role that St. Augustine called the apostle to the apostle, the first apostle. Who could that woman have been, really? And so I began as if my imagination was, I don't want to say this in any way that's sacrilegious, but it was almost like grace. It was something I've never experienced as a writer, that I felt my imagination was transcribing different versions. But each version, Alessandro, each version, I would almost ask you, what is the same in each version? Do you know? Can you, from reading it, what would you say is the same?
There are a lot of same things in that.
Yes.
The most important maybe is the relationship with Jesus. And then, second one, the unique theological imagination of this woman. And the third one, 7 demons, which is the real, with a fact we know by Gospels, but it is interesting. It is a mysterious thing, and it's very interesting the way you resolve it. Not only once, but in three different
ways. And for me, each of them that I will add to your list, there were two. One was that each had a longing to be recognized, to be understood for what they were. Each was rejected. The first rejected Mary was the daughter of a rabbi who dressed like a boy, who had to become male in order to read. And she learned to read. The second Mary is like what Pope Gregory thought, but again, the most innocent of humans. She had been taken off the streets and forced by society, by greed, to become this prostitute. And even so, she longed for nature. She longed to be recognized for whom she was. But she also longed to read. And you see in story one, someone going against all first century custom for women. She learned to read. The second, the prostitute learned to read. The third was half Roman. And so because she's rich, wealthy, she had tutors, but reading again, in my world, releases the most essential parts of, and the best thoughts and the going beyond the self. Each of those three women, unlike all the women, or most women in the first century, had literacy as a way to become something else. And so that's the longing to be recognized and the longing to learn and to use language in ways that had been, for all purposes, forbidden. So both of them, all three of them, were recognized by Christ. The first one, she's dressed as a boy, and he knows. He recognizes the essential. In the Magdalene, he recognizes in this woman who is this discarded human being in a ditch. He lifts her up. She's almost blinded with being beaten. She is, just a discarded human being, and yet he sees in her, he recognizes in this refuse, he recognizes who she is. And she, in this one tiny moment when she's barely conscious, she feels a tranquility that someone somehow knows who she is. And in the third, she has this complete mask. She uses everything because she has always felt rejected by her parents, completely rejected. And so she rejects others. And only in this one scene where she is being fought by Judas, Judas is punching her, and she actually feels the temptation of death. End this life. I've had enough. I've been rejected. It's enough. Again, Christ recognizes her. And so each of these three versions were placeholders of us, all the rejected souls in us. For 1,000 reasons people are rejected. And yet, when we feel the comfort of recognition, of acceptance by Jesus, And that's what I see in Jesus. He was able to see the essence and to love. And so for me, all three of these very different people represent us, the different versions of us and our longing.
I find it very interesting the fact that each of these women has the gift of making Jesus laugh.
I love that.
Yeah. Because the fact that Jesus could laugh is a big issue in the history of theology. You remember The Name of a Rose by Umberto Eco. Everything was the idea that Jesus could laugh is an heresy. On the other hand, there is a lot of studies about the fact that if you read them in the right way, the Gospels, parables, especially parables,
right? There is a small,
humor. Yes,
there's a small,
wit.
That's right. There's a wry twist.
But it's the first time that I find a description of Jesus so fond of laughing.
Yes,
so
but I have to tell you an anecdote.
It is part of you because you are very like humor. You like smiling and laughing.
But it's the last quote in the book for me is one of the most important things. Not written by me, but the theologian John Donne. And I've said this to various people, and yesterday to Joël Dicker and Aurelio Matola, that quotation means so much to me. And it is that the face of God is not the mask of tragedy or the mask of comedy or even the wryness of irony. Rather, it is the compassionate face of humor. Now, what I really wanted to do, and I did it, I wrote it, but if one can say one is given a transcription, for me, when I was imagining Jesus, he was really wanting to laugh and was so weary and tired. And half the time, there was no way he had time to laugh. He was so serious. And then he is given, in the first Mary, an example of someone who never thought she was funny at all. She's the daughter of a rabbi. She could quote anything from, any part of the Bible. And yet, he looks at her, and she's really funny to him. And it wasn't an excuse to laugh. It was like a fresh reason to love the world by laughter. And I want to tell you an anecdote that is so odd. It has nothing to do with this book. It happened to me yesterday. Of all things, at 7 o'clock in the morning, 7:15, I'm in the Vatican as a part of the Academy of Science, very serious group, very serious. And we're all to go and have 15 seconds to say something to the Pope. Everybody's trying to, what can you say? What can you say? 15 seconds. And I came up and and Cardinal Turkson had said, speak from the heart. Oh, right, 15 seconds, you're going to speak from the heart. So all I could think of were these little messages that come every day, daily message from the Pope. I know, sorry, excuse me, mea culpa, mea culpa. I'm sure he doesn't write them. But he probably gives direction to them because they are so beautiful and so important. And so I read them, and then I pray for him. I pray for the spirit of Pope Francis. And so I decided, with my 15 seconds, I would say, I pray for you every day. And it relieves, especially the first Maria Magdalene. She really understood that she relieved him. She relieved him with herbs, and she never really understood why she was funny. She didn't care. She knew that he found he found comfort in laughing at her, not knowing all these things. Like, what do you do when you sleep together? You know, oh gosh, that scene was hard to write.
What is the difference between consolation and salvation?
They're intimately together for me. These books were unlike anything I've ever experienced in that I felt this was the most consoling I could feel in a moment in time of great despondency that has many sides. The dedication is to my father, who died during this period, and I couldn't be there because of COVID. And so who can console you? Even the friends of mine whom I will never convince to be anything but an atheist or an agnostic, they understand when I talk about the great consolation that a concept, even if to them it doesn't exist, it exists, and that can give great comfort. For some people, that leads to the feeling of being saved. I actually hoped that this book could be given to the sick. I even tried to get it in a Los Angeles hospital. I think they thought, you know. But for me, consolation and comfort can lead to the feeling of being saved. They are separate, but they can be together. I can't save, but my hope is by imagining a companionship with Christ, I can be a channel of consolation.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I have a last question for you. I always found fascinating the fact that Jesus prefers telling stories than teaching parables.
Yes.
And so the Christian is almost compelled to be a storyteller. Don't you think so?
There's a section in which I literally take that question and make it a question from Mary to Jesus. Why do you tell these stories? And why, at the end of the day, just as in some of the Gospels it's described in little phrases, then do you talk to the apostles about what you're doing? And his response is that this is what reaches the human heart. You remember the story. If you even think about the history of human beings and how we move from an oral culture to a written culture and now to a digital culture, it was the story, it was also the rhythm, but it was this ability to capture the imagination and make a representation of a schema that you don't forget. If you just mention any parable, Good Samaritan. Now, we can read it and translate it and find meaning after meaning, different epochs of our life, but the story is represented almost like a cognitive schemata, almost like a visual representation. And that is consolidated. I'll speak as a cognitive neuroscientist. Even from the standpoint of neuroscience, that was brilliant, because we remember. And we take it out and then we get a fresh interpretation. How many thousands and thousands of sermons on the Good Samaritan are there? And yet each time someone has an insight that seems fresh and that gives you a new sense of hope for that prodigal son.
Well, thank you very much. I'm very glad that you wrote these stories. I'm very glad you wrote your essays. And you're waiting for you already for our next book. We don't know if it is a fiction.
Who knows what it will be? Who knows?
Something different.
Yes.
But we are very glad that Maryanne Wolf is a good friend with Università.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Grazie.